Hi everyone. When I was in my mid-20s, I was given an old leather-bound notebook. It was antique, and I think the person who gave it to me never expected me to actually use it. It has a red cover and it's edged in gold. It's the most beautiful thing ever. And I began taking it on travels and journeys and expeditions and keeping notes in it, but only a certain kind of note. Notes on what I call values, value stories, stories that encapsulate the essence of a society, an essence of a society that must be passed from one generation to another through tales and folklore. I'm turning the contents of this notebook into a book called The Red Notebook. And I've written an introduction, and I want to read it here now. For as long as I can remember, I have been drawn to the stories that people tell in hushed voices while passing the time. Tales conjured throughout history by lost generations. During my early travels through Africa, Asia, Latin America, and far beyond, I began to notice that everywhere I went, people carried in their hearts short, poignant tales, fragments of truth polished over centuries by telling and retelling. 40 years ago, I started writing these value tales down in an antique leather-bound notebook with a gloriously red cover, thinking of them not as folklore alone, but as measured capsules of wisdom that teach quietly and profoundly. These tales are not owned by any one people, faith, or civilization. They belong to humanity as a whole, and they are shared in their inheritance, a cultural DNA of humankind. Like seeds scattered by wind and time, they take root wherever they fall, adapting themselves to local soil and growing into new forms. Yet despite their diversity, they all speak of the same things: courage, kindness, patience, truth, generosity, humility, love, and so much more. In an age like ours, restless, distracted, and overwhelmed by digital noise, such tales are more important than ever. They remind us of the qualities that make us human and of the values that hold societies together. They whisper lessons that cannot be found in textbooks or algorithms. They are distilled and essential, an experience of preserved and refined through countless tellers who understand that wisdom is not taught but transmitted. Unlike the moral fables of our current societies, which declare their lessons openly, these teaching tales work by suggestion and by resonance. They do not command or preach, and their power lies in subtlety. A story about a seed planted in dry ground is not only about courage, it is courage. A parable about a lamp that burns through generosity does not tell us to be kind. It shows us how kindness gives light. This is one of the oldest and most sophisticated methods of teaching known to humankind. In the East, and particularly in Sufi traditions, it is understood that certain truths cannot be grasped through mere explanation. They must be felt. A teaching story operates like a key, unlocking a chamber within us that reasoning cannot reach alone. Each time we hear such a story, it reveals itself in a slightly different way because we ourselves have changed. These are not children's stories, though children delight in them. Rather, these stories are for adults who have forgotten how to wonder. They bypass intellect and speak directly to intuition, the quiet part of us that recognizes truth, not by argument, but by recognition. Over the years, my battered red notebook has filled with stories from all points of the compass, featuring a fisherman on the coast of Brazil, a calligrapher in Ming Dynasty China, a lamp maker in the Medina of Marrakesh, a monk resting beneath a mango tree on the northern border of Nepal. The details differ, but the values are constant. In Benin, courage grows from a seed planted in drought. In Suriname, compassion takes the shape of a hummingbird tending a wounded jaguar. In Finland, justice is decided by the snow itself. In Japan, forgiveness is learned from a wounded crane. And in Tibet, curiosity becomes a dialogue between a child and a bell that sings only for the wind. Each of these tales is a mirror reflecting the same truth, that though it wears many faces, wisdom is universal. In some cases, the cultures that actually created these stories may have vanished, but the values they carried endure. They are the unseen architecture of civilization, the moral grammar beneath the surface of humanity's conversation with itself. For most of human history, stories were not entertainment, but they were medicine. In traditional societies, when a person was troubled or lost, a healer might not prescribe herbs or rituals, but tell a valued tale. A story chosen to heal a particular part of the spirit or mind. The tale would act like a mirror, showing the listener something they could not yet see. Modern psychology is beginning to rediscover what ancient storytellers always knew, that stories have the power to reorder the self. They mend what has been broken, illuminate what has been forgotten, and reveal hidden meaning where nothing at first seemed to exist. Teaching tales function on a multiple of levels, all at once. A child hears an adventure. An adult perceives a moral. A seeker senses a doorway to open. Their effect is cumulative, subtle, and transformative too. You cannot force their meaning. You can only allow it to unfold. In this sense, value tales are not simply literature, but rather they're instruments of insight, tools for reflection, compassion, and change. Each one carries within it a tiny spark of wisdom that kept whole cultures sane throughout history. The modern world, for all its progress, is suffering from a kind of amnesia. We've forgotten the wisdom that kept our ancestors in balance with one another and with the earth. We have built vast networks of communications, yet often fail to communicate meaningfully. We possess more data than any civilization before us, yet we hunger for understanding. Teaching tales remind us that the deepest truths are not invented, but are remembered. The story of the lamp that burns from generosity, or the weaver who teaches that wisdom is what we choose not to weave, contains an elegance that no textbook can rival. They are simple, not because they are naive, but because simplicity is the most profound form of sophistication. In recording and retelling these tales, my intention is not to fossilize them, but to keep them alive. For stories, like seeds, must be planted afresh in each generation. They change as they grow, although their essence remains the same. Every civilization has flourished upon a foundation of values, qualities that give sense to freedom and shape the way we all live together. Yet in times of rapid change, those values can be eroded. Value tales are a quiet act of resistance against that erosion. They remind us that generosity feeds much more than hunger, that patience is strength disguised as calm, and that humility is the truest form of wisdom. These stories are not moral commandments, but living examples. They demonstrate that courage is planting a seed even when the rain seems impossible, that honesty is not about perfection, but about being courteous to reveal one's flaws, that forgiveness, loyalty, and compassion are not lofty ideals, but simple daily acts that sustain our humanity. Each of these values is both timeless and urgently modern as well. In an era defined by division and digital uproar, they offer a counterpoint of stillness and connection. They remind us that progress without purpose is hollow, and that a society's greatness is measured not by its technology, but by the values it lives by. The tales in this collection may appear short, or rather shorter than short, and almost fragile in structure, but within their brevity and their simplicity lies a vastness. They're like drops of distilled truth, tiny, glimmering, and endlessly profound. When read together, they form a mosaic of the human spirit, the same spirit that built temples, crossed oceans, and whispered lullabies in 100,000 languages. Over the decades of my travels, from dusty roads of the Sahel to the high passes of the Andes, from the ancient Medina of Fez to the monasteries of Tibet, I've gathered these stories as one might gather lovely shells from distant shores. I began noting them down in the little red-backed notebook, never imagining they would one day be shared beyond its own pages. To me, the notebook became a kind of compass, a moral compass, a reminder that wisdom is not concentrated on any single place, but scattered everywhere, waiting to be discovered. Sometimes the teller would contend that the story he was telling was true. Other times they would shrug hard and say it may never have happened, but then it happens every day. What they meant, I think, was that these tales mirror the condition of being human. They show us our weakness and our potential in equal measure. In retelling them, I've tried to remain faithful to the essence while allowing them to breathe in a contemporary idiom. I do not claim ownership over them. No one can. My task has been to polish them lightly, to remove the dust of time so that their inner light can shine through once again. In a world where information multiplies so exponentially, stories like these offer something that is exquisitely rare. They offer meaning. They are antidotes to cynicism and fragmentation, small acts in themselves of cultural repair. Each value tale is an invitation to reflect. You see, they speak in parables because truth, when spoken plainly, often passes unnoticed. But when truth is wrapped in a story, it slips past our defenses and lodges in our hearts. A man may forget a sermon, he will remember a story for life. A nation may lose its wealth, but not the wisdom embedded within its tales. And any civilization may change beyond recognition, yet its stories remain as subdued guardians of its soul. These tales endure because they speak not only to us, but through us. They reconnect us to a lineage older than any book or building, a lineage of storytellers who understood that wisdom is not something we invent, but something we inherit, and it in turn must be passed on. When a community loses its stories, it loses its memory. And when memory is lost, so too is identity. We preserve and retell these tales then as not a sentimental act, but as an act of human survival. In one of the stories in this collection, a little boy in Lhasa, Tibet, learns that a great bell will ring only when the wind listens. The lesson, though shrouded in language of metaphor, could not be more direct. It reminds us that understanding comes not from striking the world with our questions, but from being quiet enough to hear its answers. So too with these tales. They won't reveal themselves to hurried minds or to distracted hearts. They require listening, the kind of listening that modern life has forgotten. If you read them slowly, perhaps one a day, you may find that they begin to echo inside you as well. Some will comfort, others will challenge, and a few may disturb, but each in their own way is a conduit to a deeper way of seeing. Storytelling is circular. The teller gives the story, the listener receives it, and in receiving becomes a teller in turn. By reading this collection, you join that ancient circle. As retellings of traditional folk tales and as teaching stories gathered over decades of travel, the tales are yours to carry, to ponder, and, if the conditions are right, to share. While the wording and the structure are original, the roots of each story belong to the oral heritage of cultures through which they come. And of course, like all true teaching stories, they appear in disparate cultures all over the world, as they have done throughout history. They need no embellishment, no stage, no screen, just a voice to speak and an ear willing to listen. In passing them on, I am not merely repeating words, but keeping alive a current of wisdom that is the foundation stone of human society. As I look back on the travels and the encounters that introduced these value stories to me, I realize that their greatest lesson lies not in any single moral, but in an act of seeking itself. To travel the world in search of wisdom is to discover that it was never very far away. It lives in the values we hold and in the tales we tell and retell.